Susan Rogers is the professor of music and neuroscience at Berklee College of Music. And prior to her science career, she was a music producer for some very well-known artists. And I think we're going to get into some of that information very soon. Welcome, Susan. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you so much, Dorian, for including me in your program. I'm really happy to be here.
Oh, great. So I read that you actually set out wanting to be an audio engineer and you left school young just to study, is this correct? To study engineering and get into the music business?
Right. I grew up in Southern California and I loved music like crazy, like a lot of young people, but I'm not a musician. And I just thought that my dream job would be to somehow contribute to the making of recorded music. Um, I did not have a college degree. There was no hope of going to college, but I'm a pretty good autodidact. So I was able to get books on basic electronics and principles of electroacoustics and magnetism and things like that. And I studied and got an entry-level job as an audio technician. You didn't see back in the late 70s, you didn't see women as engineers. You sure didn't see them as record producers. But I could get in there with schematics and a toolbox and an oscilloscope and repair the equipment. So that's how I got started back in the late 70s.
And though it may not seem so, there's quite a difference between being good at the engineering end of things and actually being a good producer with when it comes to the ear and the actual knowing how to put a song together or an album together, even for that matter.
Yes, the engineer is the technical person responsible for miking the equipment and getting the signal onto the storage device, getting it back off. Similar a little bit to a cinematographer on a film. They're capturing the action, but the producer is more analogous to a movie director who's calling the shots, determining whether or not we got a good take, things like that. And I eventually grew into those roles, and I did have success as an engineer and a producer before I left to go into the sciences.
But you must have had what they call an ear to be able to get into that, especially being a woman in that field at that point. You had to have had some kind of pre-existing condition where you were good at this. And I wondered what aspect of that and music got you interested in what was going on in the mind.
You do have to be attuned to music and to your own response to it. Because if you're in charge of moving a microphone around, or if you're in charge of saying, that was a take, we got it, you have to have an internal decision making process that's deciding the difference between good and bad. This will work and that won't. So I was an avid music listener as a kid, radio and records, just like crazy. So when I walked into the room, when anyone who's a record maker walks into the room, they're bringing with them all of those listening experiences that have shaped their unique listener profile. After I did have a great success back in the late 90s, which was back in the days before streaming when record producers made a lot of money, I could enter college. And I knew when I was in college that I was interested in the nervous system and the brain and neuroscience. But in particular, I wanted to understand some of those mysteries of what are we doing when we're in the studio and we're deciding that something is a yes, where a minute ago it was a no. What's the difference between no, that'll never work, and yes, that will? And those differences can be so small, but someone in the room is listening and making a decision about that.
And sometimes they must almost seem like they're sort of instinctual, but they're probably rooted in something.
They are, exactly, that's it.
Instinctive, instinctive, sorry.
Yeah, they are. It's a knee-jerk reaction. It's a sense of knowing, but there's also great doubt. There's just great doubt. I had the good fortune years ago to do some work with the late, great, legendary producer Phil Ramone, known for Billy Joel and Paul Simon and John Lennon. And I was in my 30s, he was in his 50s. And I asked him, Phil, at what point in your career did this start to get easy? And he just looked at me and he said, not yet. And what he was saying was, a life in the arts is a life in problem solving. And the problems are so varied and so complex, you'll never see the exact same problem twice. So no matter what you're doing, and I think this is true of the sciences as well, you're having to solve a problem that you've never seen before. Not all the time, but frequently.
So it sounds like a lot of it is kind of getting to the point where you just trust yourself and your, I guess you call them instincts for lack of a better word, yet not let your ego take the helm and say, I'm always right.
Oh gosh, yeah. The folks who are really good at this have great faith and great doubt in equal measure. They've got enough um, confidence to be able to take the job and to be able to say to your client and your label, yeah, we can do this. We can take this raw material and we can shape it into something that will be viable, will be commercial, and that we're thinking that a large number of people are going to like. Now that I've studied music and the brain more, now that we know more about music-induced emotions and liking and disliking and how that happens, we know now that, wow, there's no way anyone can say for sure people will like this record. There's just too many variables. But you can say with a pretty good amount of confidence that this should hit home for a large number of people. Who those people are, you simply don't know because context matters and experience, and your competition is out there. And you might release a record that you think is the next big thing, and on the same day, other records uh, proved that, yeah, the public's appetite has shifted and yours isn't going to get attention, which is not dissimilar from what happens in the sciences.
Right. Now, shifting back to something you said a couple minutes ago about, all these different factors and hearing what things sound like in different parts of the room, it seems like the skill set, there are many, many parts of the brain and many things you have to be cognizant of. And I'd seen an interview with you and you were talking about waiting for Prince to come in, because that's one of the people you worked with, and hearing his footsteps, and it struck me that you probably recognize his footsteps as opposed to anyone else's. And I wondered, to what degree is there like this pattern recognition that's part of this for music, having a good ear for this stuff? Like,
Yeah, that's where the mystery lies. Being an educator at Berklee College of Music, I'm working with students who presumably want to have a career in music. And I and some of my colleagues can recognize some of them aren't cut out for it. Some of us are pretty darn good at recognizing our receptivity to music. We know our music listening brains and we can make a rapid assessment of good versus bad. It's subjective, but we know what we like. We know what it sounds like. And not everyone has that ability. A couple of years ago, I published a book called This Is What It Sounds Like. And that's the entire thesis of the book, is that each listener profile is unique. And if we really love music, there are ways in which we can maybe work on our listener profile to get better at recognizing the music that we love the best.
I was just going to bring up the book actually, and I wondered the listener profile, to what degree do the differences within that reflect any differences in things that go on within somebody's brain? Like, are there people who are more, I know you break things down into like the four musical dimensions, like people who are more melody
Mm-hmm.
and more rhythm people, more lyrics people, more timbre people. Like, are there innate differences with these people within what's going on in the brain?
I don't believe that the differences are innate. I believe that they evolve, and I'm not talking about the evolution of species, but our taste evolves during our lifetime based on experiences that we've had in our youth, and in particular, the experiences we have during adolescence and puberty. So. Uh, I love how the biologist Sir Darcy Thompson said everything is the way it is because it got that way. So our musical taste got that way. Imagine being 4 years old and you're in the back seat of the car, you're with your family, and you're on your way to vacation. Maybe you're on your way to Disneyland or something, and some music comes on the radio, and you feel great. This is the first day of that holiday, and you're going to Disneyland. This is going to be great. You feel great. And a piece of music comes on the radio that just so happens to match the feelings that you have going on, the neurotransmitters coursing through your body right now, the endorphins, and you feel so good. And that music sounds like it's a perfect match for how you feel. These kinds of associations form below our awareness most of the time. We're not really aware of it, but little by little in childhood and in adolescence, we're learning this is the music of my culture, of my family, of my friends, of my people. You're having these positive and negative experiences. When we step outside of our comfort zone, as we sometimes do with fashion or with foods that, we've never tried before, but yeah, maybe I'll give it a go. Let me taste it and see if I like it. When we step out of our comfort zone, it either works for us or it doesn't. If it doesn't, you learn to be cautious. And if it does work, you learn to be a little bit more open-minded. So exposure and individual experiences help to shape what your brain and nervous system consider to be the music that's personally the most rewarding to you, where you get your treats. Now, should you happen to love melody more than lyrics, or to love that rhythm more than electric guitars, let's say, how that differentiates, I don't know. I've never read any research reports that specifically say how that happens, but we do know that different features of music can independently of the other features give a listening brain a treat, meaning a release of dopamine.
I did see an article about how music that was of your youth during a certain, I can't remember exactly the time frame, whatever was popular then that you listened to was sort of your comfort food of music usually to go back to.
Yes, Charles Darwin wrote about how the music faculty probably evolved to facilitate sexual selection, and that period of right around puberty, when our emotions and our hormones are just running amok, that's when we are most likely to bond to music, because the music of our youth uh, hits us when our emotions are really raw, right on our skin, and when we need help communicating to let someone else know what our strengths and weaknesses are, to attract a mate, to fend off rivals. That's when we're most likely to bond with music. And those ties become very important in our youth. Now, as we get older, maybe we get married, we settle down, we've got different problems to solve, and music isn't as effective at those more adult problems.
Mhm.
But those artists who spoke to us when we were hurting, or who gave us lyrics, gave us words when we couldn't solve a problem, those artists took care of us when we needed someone to teach us and take care of us. So we bond to them, and it becomes very serviceable. That music does throughout our lives. That'll do for most of us, unless we work in music or in the arts, and then we tend to be more open-minded, and we're willing in adulthood to go searching for other styles.
But I imagine during those formative times also music could work, I guess, conversely or equally. If something traumatic is going on and you associate a song or a piece of music with that, it could have the opposite effect, yet as strong an effect if you were traumatized, and that would
Yes,
be.
that can happen. Those associations can happen. They're more likely to happen when we're young, especially if you're hearing a piece of music for the very first time. And if it's different enough from most music and you're hearing it during a bad time, you may associate that with something that is aversive. And
Mhm,
so you avoid that. And whether you're consciously aware of that or not, doesn't matter.
mhm. So this suggests there's really some sort of developmental evolution i- of your mind, your brain, along with your musical listening. If you can, certain artists can help you when you feel very depressed versus music that you hear when you're depressed that causes, you to relive that. I guess when you're younger, if you're still imprinting it, I don't know what the word would
Yeah,
be, but
nostalgia, memories of music are reportedly one of the most common reasons in the research I did. It was the most common reason why people choose a particular record to listen to. They want to reactivate certain memories, and presumably those are happy memories. I'm not one of those listeners. I don't listen to music for nostalgic reasons, but the research I did showed that 1 out of 4 people do. They like revisiting the past through music. Um, I would imagine, I don't know this personally, but I would imagine that if there's a particular song that reminds you of someone you'd rather forget, or a bad breakup or something like that, maybe you wouldn't want to listen to it later in adulthood. That's probably true of a lot of people. I can't speak to it personally because I haven't had that experience, but
right, sure. Do you know, have you done any research into how melodies work in the brain versus lyrics versus rhythm? Are there different parts of the brain that are activated by these, or can you separate them and test that?
yes, yes, a lot of good research does that. So for nearly all of us, virtually all of us, the auditory regions in the right hemisphere are specialized melody, tonality, and harmony. This is the slower processor over here above our right ear, because hearing one single pitch doesn't tell you much of anything. A melody only matters by the relationship among the notes. So hearing one pitch is not informative at all. Hearing a second pitch going up or going down or staying the same starts to give you more information. So on that right-hand side with that slow processor, that's where we savor melody and harmony. We take our time, we let that marble roll around a little bit over there. In contrast, the left hemisphere, just above our left ear, is specialized as a fast processor for handling speech, because speech is a very rapid stream of information and the phonemes they happen pretty quickly. So we use that fast processor on the left-hand side for speech, and that right-hand side for the intonation, the tone of voice, the
Right.
speech prosody. Uh, some of us, when we're listening to music, um, prefer to go for that melody, and a lot of people don't listen to the lyrics. When someone says to you, "Oh, I never listen to lyrics," believe them, because it is possible to focus on what's going on in that right hemisphere and ignore what's happening in the left. Other people are the opposite, where if the lyrics don't speak to them, they're not interested. And actually would have a hard time, many folks have a hard time remembering what the melody is, but they can kind of get there kind of close. They can, however, recite the words. They really focused on the words. In the middle up there is rhythm processing. Many of us, I'm one of them, are real rhythm lovers. And if the rhythm on a record doesn't catch me, I'm not as interested. I'm not going to go further and pay attention to the lyrics or the melody if the rhythm isn't strong.
So I'm guessing each of these types of people who focus on these things have a slightly more active part of their brain that makes them uh, be
Exactly.
that kind of person. But I wondered about like instrumental versus lyric music. I guess there's two different ways of processing that, right? I mean, two separate things.
Yes, yes. So I think of it this way. When we listen to music, well, the very first thing that has to happen is auditory circuits must determine that there's music in the room, because there's usually other sounds going on. Once you've performed auditory scene analysis and you've determined, yep, there's music in here, the next thing you do, this happens in very, very rapidly, in under a second. You perform kind of a scan to see what the timbres are. And some work coming out of Wake Forest University and other places showed how quickly this happens. In under a second, we recognize, oh, this is jazz, this is electronica, this is classical music. I don't like that. or I love that. This is my favorite thing. So we can reject music in under a second if the timbre suggests, no, this isn't my thing. This isn't my style. But if you're open to it and you want to listen, from there, your listening brain can move its spotlight of attention and hone in on the lyrics, hone in on the rhythm, hone in on the melody, hone in on the overall style, hone in on the performances. I'm going to be listening for, are you really on that microphone? Are you really delivering 100% to me, or are you phoning it in? So we move that spotlight of attention around to places where we've received treats in the past. We are constantly forming expectations for how the music's going to go. We make predictions. I think this is going to be good, or I think this is going to be bad. And then we're waiting for a change in the music that either violates or confirms the predictions. That is what generates the biggest dopamine hit. Every brain is doing the same thing, scanning for its treats, and happy when it finds a treat and very disappointed when it doesn't. And it basically tunes out and stops listening. When we don't
Right.
find a treat, we're like, yeah, I'm done with this.
Right. A lot of people, of course, there's so many popular songs and we, listen in our car and sing along. And it seems to me quite common that people know the lyrics by rote. And I learned this kind of by trying to sing a song, Just My Imagination, which I think is, oh, it's a beautiful song. And of course, knew the words, but then when you're singing them and you think about it, it's like, this is a stalker song. It's actually kind of creepy. And it's like the difference between knowing the words and knowing the words seemed, it kind of struck a chord in me that there's something there that like just kind of knowing the sounds of the words versus like the actual meaning.
We do that a lot. And lyrics are funny because they go back and forth between talking to ourselves and talking to another person. Because the lyrics don't have to follow the same rules as prose or as poetry. The listener can decide for him or herself who you is in a lyric. You can make it about yourself, you can make it about the person you'd like to be singing to, or who you think the artist is singing to. So lyrics are very flexible that way, which is why a lot of us don't really pay attention to them. I've heard it said that Sting's Every Breath You Take, classic record, is really creepy. Every breath you take, I'll be watching you. That sounds unpleasant.
There are quite a few songs like that when you break it down. It's kind of like, what? Blondie, for some reason, has a lot of stalker songs. I don't know.
Yeah,
What
and
are you up
and
to?
sometimes we enjoy songs tremendously, and we're just not really sure what they're saying, and we don't care. So
Yeah.
lyrics, they tend to mean whatever we need them to mean, and there's no one to tell us that we're wrong. That's the funny beauty of Mondegreens, where you get the lyrics wrong. When we were on the Prince tour, one of our 18-year-old techs on the crew, Matt Larson, said, "Oh, I love that song that Prince wrote about Marvin Gaye." And we said, "What song about Marvin Gaye?" He said, "When Doves Cry." We don't know anything about Marvin Gaye and When Doves Cry. Well, how does Marvin Gaye have anything to do with When Doves Cry? He goes, the first lyric, dig if you will the picture of you and Marvin Gaye and the kids. The lyric is of you and I engaged in a kiss, and he heard you and Marvin Gaye and the kids.
Oh my goodness. Well, sometimes you hear what you want to hear, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, and he thought it was great, and it worked for him. So who's to argue?
Well, you obviously work with some great, great artists, and you mentioned Prince. I mean, he must have had an amazing musical intelligence. I mean, I've heard about him. Also, someone you mentioned in music you like, Sly Stone. I just heard an interview about him, and he's a fascinating character because he was a multi-instrumentalist and also extremely high musical intelligence. What can you tell me about working with certain people who have this? I mean, what's different about them? What's different about Prince and, say, me?
I like that line in the Prince song that said, "Those kinds of cars don't pass you every day." Oh, yes, that's true. He was no mere mortal when it came to his musical ability. Since I know some neuroscience now, we know more about where creativity comes from, and we know some of the circuits involved in permitting creative, original thoughts. We also know that there's a very rare subset of human beings that are what we might call hyper creative. And these folks are marked by, it's actually sort of a kind of leaky faucet. So there are a couple of circuits in the brain that are normally inhibited, and they need to open. The faucet needs to open to allow far-fetched ideas to be retrieved. Once you've got a whole bunch of far-fetched new ideas, then you need to quickly separate the relevant from the irrelevant ones and move along. And that's the genesis of creativity. And here come your new ideas, and you decide, okay, this will be good. And you move from art to craft. Art is the original thinking, craft is getting it done. For folks who are hyper creative, they show reduced inhibition in these circuits, meaning the gates don't close all the way, meaning the ideas keep coming and coming and coming and coming. And that was definitely the case with Prince. Now, if you're moving from art to craft, the only way you can keep working is if you're really fluent on a variety of instruments. And Prince was incredible on piano, on guitar, on bass, on vocals, on drums. So he could work without having to stop and call in other musicians, unless it was horns. He could do everything else himself. So his ideas kept flowing like mad, and he had the focus and the self-discipline to get an awful lot of work done. In my 22 years of being in the recording studio nearly every day, I've only known one other person personally who exhibited those traits, and yet he didn't have the same success as Prince. Otherwise, you'd know his name. He worked in music for a time and then moved off onto other things. But a hyper creative is a rare bird, and Prince was one of them.
Sounds like you got to be a part-time sponge and then put it to work.
Yes, and work incredibly hard in
Mhm.
your youth in order to have the craft that would allow you to express this fire hose of ideas.
Yeah.
That's a rare combination.
And I saw some of the other people you worked with, like David Byrne, also extremely creative, maybe not a multi-instrumentalist, but he seemed very high concept. Uh,
Yes.
yeah. So
Yeah, well, that was one of David's great strengths. I said was, it is one of David's great strengths, is he is an artist through and through. His capacity to visualize things that haven't existed prior, and his capacity to recognize that just right blend of new ideas have served him for decades in a way that other artists would envy. David is just among the most respected artists in New York, so he's got a lot of people he can call upon to play a range of instruments and help him facilitate his art.
and you worked with Laurie Anderson also, right?
Very briefly, I did, yeah.
She also seems like that. I
Oh,
guess a lot of these people do integrate a sort of visual aspect to their work, on stage. So they probably have a high visual intelligence as well, a lot of them.
it seems like it. Yes, from what I've seen, folks who are musically very, very gifted um, don't stop at music. They do extend their creativity into the visual realm with greater and lesser degrees of success. Uh, yeah.
Do you think, well, not do you think, but what benefits to the brain can performing or studying music do? What can it have? What benefits can it have?
So great. And these benefits accrue faster in youth, of course, but they accrue in old age as well. By old age, I'm talking 80s. We could still learn to play a musical instrument in very late age. But what happens is when we're learning a musical instrument in our youth, our auditory wiring that exits each cochlea on the left and right side, that wiring, that bundle of neurons gets fatter and thicker. And the nuclei in the auditory path also get fatter and thicker. And what happens is we get faster and better at recognizing subtle differences in sounds. I say we, but I'm not including myself here because I'm not a musician. But for trained musicians, meaning people who engaged in formal musical training with repetition and practice over at least a period of 3 years or more, develop the capacity to be an auditory athlete, which makes them better and faster at recognizing all types of sounds. What this does for us is does quite a lot. But in old age, if you find yourself in the nursing home and you have a caregiver who's speaking to you in a very thick accent, you'll benefit from being a trained musician because it'll be easier to understand what's being said. As our hearing degrades with age, trained musicians are better able to recognize speech and noise and to to overcome some of the difficulties that comes with losing a bit of acuity as we get older. But there's more. Little kids, age 4 and 5, who participate in music activities are shown to be more empathetic than others, more pro-social behaviors, more cooperation, in part because when we make music with people, we have to look at them. We have to look at them and synchronize our bodies to theirs. So music gives us the benefit of learning to cooperate and coordinate our gestures, our bodies, our voices with others. There's more. When we sing in a group with other people, we breathe with them. We sing the same words with them. We become bigger. We go from being an individual to being part of a much larger group, which feels good. And the psychoneuroendocrine system likes it. And that improves our immune system. It improves our ability to ward off disease. There are so many benefits from musical participation. And you don't have to be trained to sing in a choir. Everyone has a musical instrument right there in their throat. You can sing along with others. You can even just play a tambourine if you're too shy to sing. We still get benefits from that.
Right. It always fascinated me the conversation within the ensemble. I mean, having experienced that a little bit with performing jazz, but also working at Lincoln Center and seeing string quartets, they have their own conversation going on amongst themselves, and then also with the audience. So it's like a dual level situation. That's really
So beautiful. There was some startling work, it was startling to me. Um, they took kids at camp, kids, I'm talking 10, 11, 12 years old, and randomly assigned them to 3 different activities. There was a singing activity, there was an art activity, the drawing and painting, and there was a competitive sports activity. And these kids were measured on cooperation, competition, betrayal. So they measured the kids on some of these behavioral tasks afterward. And the kids who were in the singing group were the least likely to betray one another and the most likely to cooperate with one another. It startled me a bit because the kids who were in the art programs were most likely to betray each other and they were the least likely to cooperate, which
oops.
made me really laugh. I was an art kid when I was young, so oh no, what's it saying? I've never betrayed anybody. But still, these were statistically significant differences. The competitive kids were the most competitive, of course, and this is not innate. These kids were assigned at random to these groups, suggesting that these activities brought out these social traits.
Wow. Wow. I guess that explains Francis Bacon. Um, you mentioned before um, nursing home, and one thing I haven't seen this in action before, I noticed that it seems like people who might be completely almost out of it um, don't respond to anything. If they hear a song that they recognize, they can be almost reactivated. Like it's almost like the music part of the brain is the last part to really go, for lack of
Yeah,
better way of putting.
that's so wonderful how that happens. Uh, I learned when I was in grad school, my professors would repeat this. Music listening is a whole brain workout, which is why it has such great therapeutic value. It can activate our frontal lobes so we can love music just from cognitive assessment, recognizing that composer is great, that performer is amazing. It activates, as I said earlier, lyrics and information, regions of the brain in that left hemisphere, intonation and emotional expression regions in that right hemisphere. It activates the motor regions up here near the top of the brain. It activates the visual region of the brain because lyrics in particular, but all music, can get us to visualize scenes. Music is abstract. It means whatever we need it to mean. It's not like a painting that says there's a bowl of fruit on a table. It can be whatever you want it to be. So the whole brain and subcortical circuits, circuits involved with our self-identity, self-awareness, certainly our dopaminergic reward pathway, all that. It's getting a little bit of activity going on when we listen to music, which means there are more paths through which music can be memorized than simply speech or information. The whole brain. So a piece of music has more avenues through which to go in there and activate or reactivate an old memory. If the lyrics don't get you, the melody might, the groove might, the timbre of the voice, the lyricist, or rather the singer, might get you to realize, oh, I remember this song.
Yeah.
So many, many more paths, which makes music a useful therapeutic
Mhm.
device.
And with it, probably the associations the song brings, which is also great for those people. Well, it
Yeah,
sounds like you would advocate anybody to spend some time listening to music seriously and perhaps even studying it for their own mental and physical health.
participating in it. I would strongly encourage everyone, if you like music at all, and we got to remember that some people don't, and there's nothing wrong with them, but there is a condition called musical anhedonia. It's rare, but folks with musical anhedonia just simply don't get any pleasure from music. They are not to be judged for that. It has nothing to do with their taste. It has to do with just the innate conditions that happen when we're born. So anyway, if you like music, be friends with it. Sit down with your good buddy, piece of music that you love. And remember that when we listen to music that we love, studies show we activate network of neurons, brain network that's associated with our sense of self, self-awareness. Studies show that when we listen to music that we love, that network, the default network, becomes active. So think about it this way. When we're in our own heads, that private place that no one else has ever been or will ever be, only you can have a little buddy along there with you, your favorite music, keeping you company as you're in your own head. So naturally, music feels intimate and private and personal. So do yourself a favor and go with your little buddy into your own head, listening to the music that you love the most. And you might spend a moment scanning the features of that music that you love and asking yourself, do I love this because of the lyrics? Do I love it because of the melody, the harmony? Do I love it because of the drama of it or the performances of it? What aspect of this music is giving me the biggest treats?
Hmm. Well, that's a great way to end this, but before we go, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you to just uh, perhaps give us a little anecdote or two about your, I think they're called record pools you used to have with people you worked with.
Yeah, in the recording studio, in any creative endeavor, you're going to hit a wall where you're burnt out and the new ideas they just aren't coming. And occasionally, what you want to do when that happens is just stop trying to create so much. Stop trying to be on output and just go ahead and be on input. So we would call it a record pull, which is similar to a song pull, but it's not. In a song pull, you pass the guitar around the room and songwriters take turns playing the songs they've just written for each other. But in a record poll, you pass your favorite records around the room, and each person takes a turn saying, okay, here's a record I want to share with you. And there are kind of some unwritten rules. The record you want to share should probably be something that the rest of the room might not know. Maybe they haven't heard it in a long time. You want something that's, you want to turn them on to some new music. So get something that they might not be aware of. Then what you have to do is explain why this record and not that record. What is it about this record that you find so appealing? And what you're doing is you're letting others in on what happens in the private space of your psyche when you listen to this music that you love so much. What do you focus on? To do something like that, you're actually performing something rather generous. You're letting people know a personal, private side of you, and you're sharing music that they might actually really love themselves. So you're letting your friends know something more about you. You're learning more about your friends, and you're all getting a chance to broaden your musical palette a little bit. It's an awful lot of fun, and it's a great way to get to know people. I wish more people would do it as a social evening, you know, have folks over to the house and have a record pull. So
Yeah. It actually would make a great TV show if someone picked up on that.
oh yeah, it would. And it's wonderful when someone plays a record that really surprises you, that you never would have thought that person loves this more than anything. And now you're getting to know this person in a way you wouldn't have otherwise. But they do have to do the job of saying, here's why this record does it for me and not that record.
Well, Susan Rogers, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for your fascinating work and for taking the time out to talk with us about it.
Thank
Uh,
you.
Thank you. And again, your book is called This Is What It Sounds Like, What the Music You Love Says About You. And we hope to get a chance to talk to you further and perhaps in more detail about some of the aspects we've gone over. And there's always earworms, which I don't want to even bring up because then my head will be filled with them. And once again, I'm Dorian Devons of the Secret Science Club. This conversation has been with Susan Rogers and is part of the Dana Foundation Neuroscience and Society Chat series. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Darian. Nice to meet you. Nice to talk with you. And once again, I'm really grateful. So thanks for giving me the time to just talk about these wonderful things.
Sure, come back.
I'd love to.